Good morning. Have you ever had any unexpected problems in your life? I mean, yes, you're human, so you have. I grew up on a farm in Texoma up in the Panhandle, and some of you guys know that. And one of our jobs was we had to rake and bale hay into round bales, and so that was it was a hard job, but it was a job that we did often. And one of these mornings we were trying to do that, but it was too wet. There was dew on the hay, and it was wet, and so we had to wait for it to dry off. And there was a whole group of us, most of us teenagers, about 7 or 8 of us, and so then we're kind of bored and looking for something to do. And that's how all great stories start. We're looking for something to do, and on the edge of the field is tightly stacked round bales, and so we decided we're going to get up on top of these round bales, and we're going to race down the bales, and we're going to race across the bales like this. And so it's hard. It's not easy because you have to kind of time your steps and get the right pace. Otherwise, you're going to step in the crack and get all tripped up, and you don't want to do that. And so we all got up there, and all 7 of us in our cowboy boots, our jeans, our hats and everything, and we look down, and somebody says, "On your marks, get set, go." Well, I was pretty fast. Okay, and I would have won this race had it not been for one other guy all the way down on the other end, and his name was Marrow. Marrow was really fast. And so me and Marrow, we start running, and here we go. And about halfway, I look over, and he's beating me just barely, and we're going. Well, at the end of the bales is a row of other kinds of bales. This one you might not know. I don't know if you've seen these or not. I've got a picture, but they're called loaf bales. And they're about twice as tall as a round bale, and they were lined up right up against the end of the round bales. And so our plan was the first one to run and to jump up on top of the loaf bale wins. And so me and Merrill, we're running and we're racing, and this thing it's neck and neck. And right before I get to the end, I'm about to ready to jump. I look over to see where Marrow is, and Marrow has a problem, an unexpected problem. What we couldn't see whenever we started the race was that his line ended one short. There was a blank bale there. There was a bale that was missing, okay? Well, he got to the end of the line there, and he was committed. He was already running too fast. And so whenever he got over there, I look over, and I'm jumping up, and I just see him going, "Oh, no!" And he's committed, so he tries to jump, he tries to make it, he jumps spread eagle, I don't know why, I think maybe to try to grab some of the side of that thing, he just poof, goes into the bale and disappears. Only to reappear 2 seconds later to peel off like a cartoon and just fall to the ground. Unexpected problems, right? You ever had one of those show up in your life? Of course, we all have. Today, I want to talk about more kind of a part 2 of last week, where we started this series, Even If, and we're talking about change and what happens. What do we do whenever we have change in our lives, and change that we might not have expected? What happens when things are going well, but then all of a sudden there's an unexpected change and things get bad real quick? Well, in this series, Even If, we're going to talk about change, but we said last week some change is great. And then other changes is bad. It's difficult because the after always looks different than the before. Today I want to talk specifically about the negative change, though. It's a change that we all wish that we could do without, that none of us care for. And when that happens, when we have negative change in our lives, the very first thing that we want to do, I don't know if you're like me, at least I do, is I want to fix it. I want to try to fix that problem in my life. We want things to go back to how they were. But there's bad news, and the bad news is sometimes there's a lot of change in our lives that it can't be fixed. Some change simply cannot be fixed. And so what happens? It leaves us depressed, angry, frustrated, sad, and sometimes it even leaves us helpless. I mean, for example, maybe for you, it was the disappointment of not getting into the college that you wanted to get into. And so now all of a sudden you're having to figure out a plan B or even a plan C. Maybe for you, it was your marriage. Your marriage fell apart and you hoped that you could work it out. But whenever you tried to work it out, it just seemed to get worse. Maybe you were the key employee there, but then somebody else got hired and that dynamic changed and it shifted. Maybe somebody's perception of you changed and you can't do anything about it. Maybe you can't change the fact that you moved into a new house or a new community. Maybe you can't change the fact that you wrecked a relationship. Whatever it is, whatever the cause, you can't fix the changes, and you're afraid that things are never going to be as good as they once were. And some of us may even wonder, why hadn't God fixed my problem? Why hadn't God stepped in to help me in this situation? And I think that this right here, that thinking, that question, might be, do you agree? Is it the number one reason why people lose their faith? I don't know. If it's not the number one, it's got to be high. Where people are disillusioned with they've got problems in their life that God could fix. So why isn't He doing that? How could a good God allow bad things to happen to good people? Well, listen, if you've wondered that, and maybe you're there right now, I just want you to know you're not alone. Almost every single person that goes through hard change like that in your life, all of us, we wonder, man, God, why aren't you there to fix that problem for me? You could do something about it, but you're not. Why? But here's the thing. What if God wants to do something bigger and better than just fix your problem? You guys have seen these parents, maybe you're one of them, I don't know, but you've seen these parents that go in front of their child and just kind of act like a snow plow, right? And you go and plow all the problems that are ahead of your child so that your child won't experience any difficulty, any problems, right? Those are the parents that are in the classroom to the teacher and saying to the teacher, no, it's not, my child's not the problem, okay? You're the problem, okay? That's the parents that's going to the coach and saying, hey, how come my son's not playing? How come, what do we got to do here? You know, that's the parents that are kind of going ahead and trying to plow all the problems for the child so that the child won't have any problems to deal with in their life. And what did we see? We've had a whole generation of parents that are doing that, and what did we find out? We found out that sometimes that creates more problems. Sometimes that doesn't solve the problem. It just delays the problem and makes it worse. Well, guys, what if God doesn't want to go in front of you and plow the way and just take care of all your problems? God is not going to make everything go the way that we want it to. But He has promised us something. And He has promised us something much better than going ahead of us and taking care of all of our problems. There's a story in the Bible that gets right at the heart of this. And it's the story of Abraham and his wife Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, or in this story, Abram, he's going to change his name later to Abraham, and Sarai to Sarah, right? He had promised them a son and descendants. He said, more than you can even count. He promised them that, but the problem was he didn't deliver that right after he promised it. Now think about this. I don't know if you were ever in this situation. Me and my wife were for a little while, where you want to get pregnant, but you can't. It's not happening, right? And that can be really discouraging. You can feel helpless. But in this situation, God had promised them. And she was barren, and so she was excited. She was delighted, right? And so all of a sudden now you're thinking, let's make this happen. And so you try, and you try, and try, and try, but it doesn't happen. Month 1, 2, 3, and then it goes to a whole year, and no son comes. Well, then it goes to 2 years. What happens there with your emotions? Does it go from excitement? We know it starts there, right? And joy and delight. But then how long until it turns into maybe embarrassment? And why do I think that? I don't know, but I'm assuming that if God told you after you're barren that you're going to have a child and a son to have descendants, you probably told some people. I don't know. But if you did, now you're embarrassed. And then when does it turn to just dejection and depression? Somewhere along the way, it's got to have. And it wasn't just a year. It wasn't even just 2 years. It was 10 years. A whole decade goes. God didn't forget, though. It wasn't that he, oh gosh, well, I told him I was going to do something, and what was that? It wasn't that he was busy and that he was going to get to it later. No, God was doing something. You know, whenever they felt like, God, where are you, God? What are you doing here? How come you're not doing? But the whole time, actually, he was doing. He didn't want to just give them a son. He wanted them to have a faith first, to have something to build a family on. And so, in Genesis chapter 16, it says this. In verse 1, it says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. I mean, that is, there's a lot of emotion in that sentence. You got to know that. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Now, guys, if your wife comes to you and offers you this, it's a trap. It's not going to go well. Just listen. Say no. But did you guys know that, like, obviously to us, that's a foreign idea, and that's just crazy. But it was actually very common in their culture. It's documented, well documented in the, how do you say this word? The Hammurabi text and other Mesopotamian texts or whatever. I did my research, okay, guys? But in those times, producing an heir was an important thing, not only for the survival of the family, but for the family to thrive and progress. They needed heirs. They needed kids, and lots of them. And so they would go to great lengths to provide a child. And so sometimes, if the wife was barren, they would sleep with the slave. And so this wasn't totally uncommon. But here's the difference for Abraham and Sarah, is that God had promised them a son. And so they knew that it would happen, but they didn't wait for God's timing. Now, hey, let's ease up on them a little bit here. 10 years is a long time, and you start to begin to doubt a little bit. And that's what she did, and she begins to doubt. Maybe, I guess he didn't say that I was going to have a son. He said you were going to have a son. Maybe I'm not included in that. I don't know. And of course, obviously, they're married. And so God would establish that later in the story. Of course I meant it. It was from you. But listen, it's not enough to trust in God's promises. We must also trust in God's timing for those promises. And the story goes like this. Sarah's slave, her name was Hagar. And Hagar had no choice in the matter. She was brought into this, but nevertheless, she's caught in the middle here, and Hagar becomes pregnant. But here's where Hagar goes wrong. She's not totally innocent on this deal. As soon as she becomes pregnant, she begins to look down on Sarah. The Egyptian slave is now looking down on her owner, and that's not going to go well at all. And so Sarah, she's embarrassed, she's hurt, and now her slave is looking down on her, and so Abraham just tells her, hey, you deal with it. Deal with her the way that you see fit. He didn't want to get involved. And so she does, and she starts mistreating her badly, so badly that, in fact, Hagar, she runs away. She can't stay there. She's a vulnerable woman. It must have been so bad that she would rather go with her chances out in the desert alone. In other words, she would rather die than to be mistreated like this. And so she does. She runs away. And then look in verse 7, 16 verse 7. It says the angel of the Lord. And anytime you see the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, anytime you see that, that's Jesus. The angel of the Lord. And of course, you'll see that later in the text where she refers to him as God, right? But anytime you see the angel of the Lord, that is Jesus. So it says, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? She said, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. And then skip down to verse 13. It says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. There are a few things that jump out to me about this from this text. And the very first one is this, that he found her in the desert. You know, he didn't find her whenever things were going well. He didn't show up in her life whenever things were going smooth. No, God showed up in the desert when things were going bad. And she was literally in a desert, but some would also say she was in the desert of her soul, too. Now, she was brought into this because of Abraham and Sarah's lack of faith. She was brought into this mess, but she also had a part to play in this, too. But God didn't go ahead of her and fix those problems. Even though she wasn't to blame to get it all started, God didn't go ahead of her and fix those problems. He allowed her to be mistreated, and He allowed her to go into the desert. Nobody wants to be in the desert. But God allows it sometimes. And I think this is where people misunderstand God. That they think a good God wouldn't allow good people to suffer. But we don't see that in the Scriptures like at all. I mean, how many times do you see God's most powerful people go through suffering first? God's most faithful people, they go through suffering first. We see that all over in the Scripture, that God allows bad things to happen to great people. Sometimes it's just because we live in a fallen world and bad things happen. And sometimes it's because God has given us free will and we do bad things to other people that harm other people. Our sin always affects someone else. But here's the second thing that occurs to me in this text, and that he sends Hagar back. Did you notice that? He didn't say, okay, let's go. That was a bad situation. Let's go. Let's find some place else to live. He sent her back. And did you see what he said to her, what he told her to do? She had a part to play in this. And he told her, go back and submit to her. That was her problem. That was her role in this, is that she was looking with arrogance at Sarah. And he told her, hey, you've got a part to play in this. You were not totally innocent of this. You need to go back and you need to fix your part. And man, I want to tell you something. When it comes to our suffering, there are some times where we are not at fault. We are totally the victim. But I don't know if you're like me. There's a lot of my suffering that I played a part in it, at least a part. And I feel like God wants us to see things clearly and to own up to our part of it. That's maturity. That's being an adult, right? Is being able to look at your part of the problem and going back and fixing what you can fix, fixing what you did wrong. Sometimes the suffering, sometimes we play a role in that. And he wants to send us back, and sometimes we just need to apologize to somebody. We need to ask for forgiveness for somebody, or we need to fix some part of it. The last thing is that, of course, and this is where the text leads to, is that God saw her. Saw her. I mean, this is not Abraham. This is not even Sarah. This is Hagar, an Egyptian slave out in the desert. But he saw her. I want to tell you something. If you are a person, you are a child of God. It doesn't matter if you're important or unimportant. God sees you, He sees your pain, He sees your suffering, and He knows about it, and He cares about it. He loves you. But God did not simply fix her situation. Rather, He told her that He saw her and that He would be with her in that situation. God didn't take her problem away, but He gave her the strength that she needed to go back and face the problem. Let me ask you a question. With your children, would you rather go ahead of them and clear out all their problems so that they didn't have any problems? Or would you rather help them find the strength that they need to face those problems? All of us would say, yeah, I would want my children to grow in maturity and strength to be able to face whatever problem that they have in life. Listen, God wants that for you too. God is a good God, but He does allow bad things to happen. This is not heaven. Stop trying to make this heaven. This is not heaven. And when we get to heaven, I promise you, nothing bad's ever going to happen to you ever again. It's going to be great. But here, it's not about being comfortable. It's about developing an enduring faith in Jesus Christ. If you will trust Him in the good and the bad, you will be better for it. Isaiah, he speaks about this in Isaiah 43. And I don't know, when I read this, I don't know if you're going to catch on to what I caught on to, but there's a word in here that really strikes me. Let me read this. It says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. And I don't know if you're like me, but there's one word in there that just catches my attention. It's said 3 times in there. And it was the word when. It didn't say if. He said when. When you go through the waters, when you pass through the rivers, when you walk through the fire. In other words, it's not a matter of if you will, but when you will. You will face change that is hard to handle. And if that's true, what does God promise us when those things happen? He promises that He will be with us. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Now, maybe you hear that and think, cool, awesome. I'd rather you just fix my problem. I mean, honestly, most of us would rather have an easy life. But I want you to think about something for a second. To say that God doesn't fix our problems, that's not necessarily true. Because what is our biggest problem, okay? It's not losing our job, or it's not our broken family. It's not our financial problems. It's not cancer, although we're getting close now. It's death. That's our biggest problem. For all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if all of us have done something wrong, we have to pay for that wrong. There must be payment for sin. And when we die, we have a choice. We can either pay for that ourselves or someone else can. Jesus came to fix that problem. The biggest problem of all. But when Jesus came to fix the problem, think about this. Matthew records that in his gospel, and the angel comes to tell Joseph what kind of a baby that they've got here, and he tells him in Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, and he says this, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him, what's the word? Emmanuel, which means God with us. That's how the book of Matthew starts. The whole thing is on the foundation of God with us now. Everything has changed because God is with us now. But look at how he ends. What is the very last words of Matthew? The very last words of Jesus. He says in Matthew chapter 28, he says, and surely I am with you always till the very end of the age. Matthew bookends his gospel with this, that he is with us. Because if God is with us, who can be against us? Do you remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? One of my favorite stories. I love that story. They were Jewish exiles in Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar, he builds up a huge statue. I mean, the biggest narcissist ever, right? And he tells everybody, hey, when you hear the band playing, worship that statue. In other words, worship me, you know. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they say, there's a problem here. We love you. You're a great king. We respect you. But that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. We're not going to bow down. We're not going to worship you. We only worship the one and only God. Well, he is furious. You guys know the story. He heats the fire up, and he throws them in the fire. But then, do you remember how the story goes? In Daniel chapter 3, he asks, he says to his people, he says, didn't we throw three dudes in the fire? And they say, yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then he says this. He says in chapter 3, verse 25, he says, look, look, I see four. I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the fourth one is different. He's built different, okay? He says, look, they're walking around in the fire unbound and unharmed, and the fourth one looks like a son of the gods. Somebody else is in there with them. God was with them. Here's the thing though, God didn't quench the fire before they felt the heat. Isn't that interesting? That God did not save them from the furnace. That God saved them in the furnace. And maybe God is doing the same thing in our lives. Now look, if God would have taken away their problem, they would have never seen God show up. If God would have taken away Hagar's problem, she would have never seen God show up. Now, if I have the chance to see God, but the only chance that I have to see God show up is if I have a problem in my life, then please don't take away my problem. I want the problem if it means that I'm going to see God show up in my life. Guys, when you got a problem, especially a big problem, start looking for God. Because He's about to show up in your life. God is with you, even if, no matter what you're going through, God is with you, even if you felt hurt for what your friend did to you. Even if you feel depressed because life will never go back to the way that it was before. Even if you can't imagine a way through all of this. Even if you can't tell how things will turn out, God is with you. So what do we do with all this? What does all this mean for us? It just simply means this: be honest. Be honest. God is a big God, but He's also a God full of compassion, mercy, and love. Just like the people of Israel, He knows that you're going to pass through those waters. And He sees everything, and you can talk to Him about that. Good or bad, you can be honest with the things in your life, and you can be honest that you hope that He'll fix those problems in your life. Be honest with God. I find it absolutely amazing here in this text that Hagar gave a name to God. An Egyptian slave gives a name to God. The scriptures are full of times whenever God gives people names or new names. Even here in Abraham, He changed his name from Abram, father, to Abraham, father of many. And Sarai, which means princess, to Sarah, which means princess of all. He changed their names, but here Hagar gives God a name, El Roi, which means the God who sees. God sees and understands your struggles, just as He saw Hagar's. You can bring your pain, your frustration, and your heartache to God, knowing that He is aware of every detail and is present when you feel unseen. And let me say one more thing about this. You know that the second step of discipleship is going from believing to belonging. God uses other people in your life to help you walk through those tough times. So maybe a good start for you is to be honest with somebody else. Find somebody that you can trust so that you can talk that out with them. I'm a big believer in small groups, and I think we all need a core group of believers to help us walk through life. But here's the other thing. Run towards God, not away from God when things get bad. Trust in Him. Things are going to go bad, but He is with you. When things change, He is with you. And when nothing seems to be getting better, He is with you. It may not be the fix that you're looking for, but He will be with you to help you get through whatever you're facing. There was a song in my playlist, on my Spotify playlist, that I listen to sometimes, and I just love the song. And it speaks to this idea, and somebody sang it. Anybody watch The Voice? Somebody sang it the other day on The Voice. Check this out.
Wide awake while the world is sound asleep, and too afraid of what might show up while you're dreaming. Nobody sees you. Nobody would believe you. Every day you try to pick up all the pieces, all the memories, they somehow never leave you. Nobody sees you. Nobody would believe you. But God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows how it's killing you. But there's a kind of love that God only knows. God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows the real you. But there's a kind of love that God only knows. For the lonely, for the ashamed, the misunderstood, and the ones to blame. What if we can start over? We can start over. We can start over. 'Cause God only knows.
God knows you, and He sees you. He said, look, I see four walking around. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. God is with you, even if. Let me pray.